Whoa.
Jeez. That was a thing, Andrew.
That was a thing. That was certainly a thing.
Hello. We're here at Movieclips Hostel-esque place, and we're here to talk about Eli Roth's Hostel.
That's a movie we're going to review today.
That's the movie we're going to review, and man, oh man.
It's a movie.
What a thing. Now, when Hostel came out...
2005.
it was quite the storm.
It really was.
I was in high school at the time, and it was kind of a Dare to See You movie.
Right.
Which later we'd find out Eli Roth has kind of made a career out of Dare to See You movies, with The Green Inferno coming out being his latest. Mm-hmm. Andrew, just overall, what do you think of this film?
I have not seen this film since 2005.
Yes.
Since I was in high school
He's
too.
seen it.
Yeah. And I remember actually liking it. Because I saw, it was around the time where the term torture porn was a big thing.
Yeah.
And really, Hostel and Saw were the two movies that really made it, mostly Saw.
Yeah.
And
Hostel kind of really cemented it.
Right, as a genre.
Yeah,
as like
exactly.
a cliche for that period.
And I think it's an interesting film. I think that Hostel kind of is the mark that torture porn has not lived up to since then.
I completely agree.
If you hear Eli Roth talk about it, he speaks about it like it's a more interesting film than I think it is.
So reverentially now these days.
Yeah, it's. I don't think all of his ideas come across, but I do think there are a lot of ideas in the movie.
Right.
Which is more than I could say for a lot of torture porn like Saw, which we will
probably compare it to.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I remember very specifically thinking, because I was a fan of Cabin
Fever, yeah.
Which was his first film, and both Cabin Fever and Hostel, he did it so quickly. I remember reading a lot about the production of Hostel, and it was a very quick production. It was very fast. I remember after I saw the movie thinking like, oh, Eli Roth is going to churn out stuff like this all the time, and the growth he had from Cabin Fever to Hostel was so significant. I thought he was going to do a lot more stuff. Incidentally, what happened was actually the opposite. He's just lived off the coattails of Hostel for almost a decade.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, Green Inferno is, we'll see what happens. True. But let's get into this movie.
Right.
He shot it, I believe, in Prague?
Yes.
Really cheap. And what's interesting about this compared to Saw is that this feels like such a more refined movie.
Yeah.
Despite Saw, when it was being made and when it was kind of playing, I think it played at Sundance, it had so much hype around it.
Right.
And this, for such a low budget, I think it was like 1.3 or something like that.
Was really cheap. It ended up making like 80.
Looks like such a more refined movie, and I think Eli Roth is a really skilled filmmaker.
Yeah.
And like you said, from Cabin Fever to this, it's huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have it's a slow burn movie, kind of. He claims it's more of a slow burn movie than it is, because if by slow burn he means like sex and boobs all over the place,
that's
then like
the thing.
I guess
it's really
so.
Sensational. It's slow burning in the horror elements, but it's a very sensational movie for those first 40 minutes. It's not like, The Shining or anything.
He said he wanted to make Amsterdam seem like an adult Disneyland.
Right.
Which I'm not sure if this is really an adult Disneyland. It's like adult in terms of like if you went to an adult section of the movie store, like it's adult, but it's not mature by any stretch.
No. For mature audiences.
Yeah, and his movies tend not to be very mature at all.
When I saw the movie for the first time in high school, I remember thinking the commentary on objectification, like the way these frat boys objectify women, obviously is mirrored. You don't have to really critique it too much. It's very obvious. It's mirrored in the way that the rich sociopaths and
the men become objects later.
Exactly. They objectify the men. That's a very clear mirroring. That's a very clear commentary. I remember, feeling that way a lot when I saw it, and going back and revisiting now, I kind of think Eli Roth's persona undermines that viewpoint because he is kind of a frat boy guy. His whole personality is kind of like a horror jock.
Yeah, it has seemed that way. When he speaks, he doesn't seem that way at all. He's actually
very articulate.
He's done our interviews where he speaks about that frat boy persona, and he's like, I wasn't a frat boy, I just go to the gym. Like that's kind of what it is. But it's interesting because I don't know if it's because he's not interested or maybe it's just a shortcoming as a writer on his part. If he could learn, or if he showed interest in portraying three-dimensional characters, he'd be unstoppable as a horror director. But really that's, for me, where his biggest shortcoming in this film and all of his films is that he creates these characters that are just so two-dimensional. The guys are all dudes, and the girls are all kind of like sexy objectified things. And just because he's saying that the men are objectifying doesn't mean that the movie needs to objectify them, but
Exactly.
it does. And it's kind of this weird thing where it's like he's showing them the way that the men see them, but should he really portray them that way to us, or should the men be the foils?
Right.
It's a strange thing. But let's get into after the slow burn,
the
torture stuff.
When the torture stuff happens, I completely agree with what you're saying too. I think he's really misanthropic. I think he hates every one of his characters.
He does.
Like I've never seen an Eli Roth movie where not even that I care about a character, but I get the sense that the filmmaker.
No,
likes
he sets them up to be tortured so that we can enjoy it.
And a question I have for you too, and this may be going a little bit too far too early, but do you think a lot of people think there's a feminist undertone to the movie when, you know, with the whole themes going on and with that mirroring going on, but do you think that is undermined when, like, it's heightened when Natasha says, who's gorgeous, I don't know who that actress is, she's absolutely gorgeous, but when she says, now you are my bitch, but do you think that's all undermined when Jay Hernandez kills her in a very audience-pleasing moment?
Yeah, I think every
message.
I think every message is undercut by sensationalism.
Yeah.
And I think
we can talk about that with the ending too, because there are two different endings.
Yeah, we're speaking more about the theatrical
version.
But let's say the torture scenes are horrific.
Right.
And when
Insanely
it came
effective.
out, very effective. When it came out, it was like nothing anyone had ever seen before.
Right.
The cutting of the Achilles tendon is just like something that curls my toes now.
And it's one of those things that's so simple, you could feel what it is like.
And it is restrained. He doesn't show us that much. That's a really horrific scene, and he really puts us in kind of the eyes of the tortured, the tortured person, the torturee.
Yeah. The first one, the friend.
Is
the first
absolutely.
It's
a horrific
effective.
scene, and it's a really well-crafted scene. Whether however you feel about what's going on in the scene, it's a really well-crafted scene from a filmmaking standpoint, and I think that carries through.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ending of kind of the mirroring of how the businessman killed his friend and how he's killing the businessman. In the alternate version is different. Correct?
Yeah, the alternate version, he sees the Dutch businessman, who's probably my favorite thing about this movie.
Yeah,
his name is Jan Vlasic or something like that. Vlasic.
Something that we just
can't
offended
pronounce.
Somebody.
Yeah, we offended a lot of Dutch people. But he sees him in the train. It's very much like the theatrical ending. And he sees him with his daughter. And that ending, instead of taking revenge on the business guy, he just steals the daughter, takes her in a train, and then runs away.
Yeah.
And then, the business guy comes out. He's like, "Where's my daughter?" So it could be misconstrued that he's doing that to torture that guy even more, or he's doing that to save her from being raised by a complete psychopath.
Yeah, both of which would be more subtle than this film allows.
That's true, but I kind of like the theatrical ending because I think what the theatrical ending does is engage the audience into that kind of objectification. Because what happens is, first they objectify women, and then they see themselves being objectified by these men. And then the third layer that happens at the end, when he kills that guy, the audience gets involved, and we objectify everybody. Because we're like, yeah, kill this dude. I want to see him tortured just as much as the other guys. So Eli Roth invites the audience to indulge in that thirst for violence, which I think is really sensational. But it's also in tone with that movie.
Yeah, and Eli Roth has spoken about his kind of the psychology of horror movies and how he feels. Because his father was a psychologist, his mother was a painter. He says that his father always said that the good dream of what the bad do, and he kind of has this feeling about horror movies that we want to see this violence because there's so much terrible things in the world that we want to go somewhere safe where we know that it's fake and we could scream and get it out in a cathartic way. Whether you agree with that or not, it's interesting to hear him talk about it. And if you're interested in this film at all, or I recommend that you watch interviews with Eli Roth because it's really interesting to hear him talk about it. I think that there is we live in a different world than it was in 2005 a little bit, and I think that there is a problematic feeling with the way he portrays violence because he's a product of Tarantino in that way.
Yeah, he is.
Where the violence is in his mind, the way he speaks about it, it's separate from any kind of violence in real life.
But that's interesting because a lot of people could say the torture porn I mean, this is kind of, pop culture treasures that we think of now in that era. Torture porn has kind of died out. I mean, Saw movies stopped being produced about a year or two ago. And now it's more of that. James Wan, who incidentally did Saw, is now doing the paranormal stuff, which is all the rage now.
And I think maybe people had had enough of this extreme violence. Well, it's tolling.
I'm wondering if, and you're going to laugh because I do this kind of stuff all the time, if the Abu Ghraib thing, which happened, like in 2004, this movie came out in 2005, Saw maybe a year before it. But there is that kind of... I do wonder if that had something to do with the fascination that we had. Maybe a lot of critics will point to that to get a good thesis out of it. I don't know.
He's spoken about it. And it is an interesting film in terms of that. It's extremely troublesome. So if you're queasy or in fact, don't, watch it.
The violence is interesting.
Yeah, but it's extreme.
Pretty extreme.
So that's our thoughts on Eli Roth's Hostel.
It lived up to my feelings of how I remembered it. I do like this movie, and I'm not ashamed to say I liked it. It does. You're right. It does have a lot of troubles with what it's trying to say, but it's incredibly effective. It's a very well crafted movie.
I wouldn't say that I like it, but it is an interesting film. So let us know what you think of Eli Roth's Hostel. Yeah. We're about to hit the road, get back in the rain, but keep checking back. There will be more and more horror reviews as Halloween approaches. We love Halloween. So until then, I'm Ryan.
My favorite holiday, and I'm Andrew.
Thank you for watching.